this is an area that I don't think a lot of people explore, I guess you could say. A lot of it, this isn't getting shared enough. Grief doesn't get talked about enough, I guess you could say. Like, we really don't. I do have a little bit of going back and forth between grief for what we have with our children and also our experience of being in the natural community too. So it's kind of a little bit of both. It's not just like super all natural community, because I think both are important. So my first question, and I think this one's actually a very important question, is how old would your child be if they were alive today?
Noah's birthday was just on the 29th of March. So she would be 13.
John James would have turned 2 on February 24th.
12.
And I was right before you, Madison, of February 20th, and I'd have an 8-year-old.
We've got Avery's 10th birthday coming up this July.
And I think that question for me is very important, because I think people see our children as babies, but the reality is some of us would have been babies and then toddlers and then kids in school and then moving on. Like, there are children, you know what I mean? So that's why I wanted to ask that one right away, because I feel like that one's just a important thing that people can see. Like, time goes by and they're still a kid. You know what I mean? Like,
and that we didn't just lose babies, we've lost every experience since then.
Yeah, we lost a whole lifetime.
This wasn't just the death of a baby, it was the death of everything they could have become. I had a history teacher in 7th and 8th grade, who she used to always talk about the great history what ifs. And she's like, what if the Holocaust never happened? Maybe we wouldn't have cancer, because who knows if the cure for cancer died in the Holocaust? Who knows what the impacts of what happened, the butterfly effect of everything. So it's not just the death of a baby, the death of our like naivety, it's the death of entire lifetimes gone completely in the blink of an eye. And everything that person could have done is gone in the blink of an eye. Everything they could have been is gone in the blink of an eye. The babies they'll never have, the grandchildren they'll never have.
How were you first introduced to the concept of out-of-hospital birth?
I actually had a really interesting first experience when I was 13. My next door neighbor, who I had formed a close relationship with, had a young child that I babysat. And when she was almost 2, my neighbor friend got pregnant again, and I was 13. And she decided to have a home birth, and she was actually a midwife, not practicing in North Carolina, but within that community. I grew up in Durham, and I babysat her child while she labored next door to me. And it was fascinating and beautiful, and it was so monumental at 13, you know. And I think from that point on, whether or not I thought about it or talked about it, I think I knew that's what I wanted. And so looking back, I mean, I wish there had been more. I mean, it sort of ended there, you know, that experience ended, and then almost 20 years passed before it was my, you know, opportunity personally. So, you know, not until I became pregnant and in that community again was I really reintroduced to the ideas and the practices and everything that goes along with it. And I just regret that there wasn't more opportunity between those experiences to learn.
Does anybody remember Mothering Magazine? Okay. I had my first son, I was only 19, and I actually had a midwife in the hospital, which was who my mom had recommended, because she was a labor and delivery nurse. So she was like, you want to use these midwives? They're great. And I had a midwife in the hospital, but some point when he was a very young baby, somebody gave me a mothering magazine, or maybe I got it at the library or something. And I loved it because I was nursing him and I was co-sleeping, and it was like talking about co-sleeping and nursing and, I just ate up with spoon, got a, subscription and read everyone covered to back. And that's how the first I saw of like home births. And then I started reading all the books, and then by the time I was married to my husband and pregnant with my daughter, his mother had all home births. Well, 2 home births, one unassisted. He was an unassisted birth. And she was like, her best friend was a midwife. She's like, Unity is my best friend. She's amazing. And there were no midwives in the hospital anymore. The practice had been like, there were no midwives in the hospital in my city, big city too, none. And they were banned from the hospital. So for years, for 6 or 7 years. And so I was like, not sure if I was quite comfortable, but I'm like, but all these beautiful stories I read and all the stuff, and she's done it. And so then I had my first home birth then. And I had 2 successful home births before Aquila was my 3rd home birth, 4th birth, and she died. And so it was not successful. But yeah, I was Mothering Magazine. And then the forums, the mothering.com forums came along soon after, and they were just ripe with all the woo you could ever consume. I was up to here when Aquila was born with woo.
I will say that I came to home birth and I came to the concept from a very mainstream point of view. I mean, I consider myself pretty mainstream, and I always had been. When I had been married probably 8 or 9 years when I found out that I was expecting Noah, and first grandchild on both sides. And I'm one of 5 kids. My mom, birthed us all naturally in the hospital. And so whenever I came to home birth, it was just from dissatisfaction from what I was experiencing with my OBGYN. I remember thinking there has to be a better way than this. This cannot be this way. I remember telling, and I probably still have these emails, and it's a little fuzzy. I actually don't revisit details about my experience. I don't revisit, it's good. These questions are good because it makes me think about those details, which are there, they're a little fuzzy now, but they're there. And it's good to remember them because it didn't just happen. This didn't just happen to me, right? It was a journey there. And then from there on, but I remember coming out of the hospital or out of the clinic, thinking, gosh, I feel like cattle being weighed to go to the slaughterhouse. Like, that's how it felt. Like, okay, get on the weight, get on the scale, move along, it was so transactional, so impersonal. And here I am, first time. I remember I was new to New York City as well. And so the whole, my whole environment was different. And then I don't even remember how I got this, but it was this pamphlet called Choices in Childbirth. And it just really resonated with me. All the things that I felt I was missing and all the things that I felt was wrong with the system that I was now a part of. It just resonated with me. And I remember just starting to look at other alternatives. I remember, going through the whole gamut of birthing centers and all this. And, but one of the main things that happened is that, I was with my OBGYN, and I knew that I needed to make a change because it wasn't the right fit. And I felt trapped. I remember feeling trapped. And this is somebody that I picked from just like a list of providers. And I remember thinking, oh my gosh, is this it for me? Like, is this all I have access to? I remember thinking, do I even have a right to make a switch? Like, I felt trapped. So then I went to a book launch for this midwife that at the time was quite popular. There had been an article about her, but actually, hold on, scratch that. I started calling up midwives in the area, and no, everyone was booked. And this one midwife was booked, and her office, they were like, oh yeah, since the movie came out, she's been nonstop. And I'm like, what movie? Like I had no idea. I was so new to it. But she had a book coming out and I went to the book signing. Actually, it's so funny. I went to a book signing in this bookstore that's kind of like at the time, it was a very niche kind of, independent type of bookstore. And it's funny because I have a store literally 1 block south of where this bookstore is. And I remember I went, they had, it was a big event. She was going to be talking about her book and signing books. And at the end of it, I went up to her and I was talking to her, and we connected. My mom had passed away weeks before that. My mom died when I was about 6 months pregnant with Noah. And suddenly, so it was still fresh, and this midwife was so caring when I told her, listen, my mom just died, and this is this experience and this moment in my life is so big, and it's now even bigger and harder without my mom. And she just connected in a way that she connected. Her and I just had a moment, and she said, call my office Monday. I'm going to fit you in. And I did. I called her office Monday and she started seeing me. So, and as I'm going along, the experience with my midwife, I was still mainstream. I remember I was taking, was it Sofran for nausea? Who does that in the natural world, right? I remember everybody was horrified that I would take, medication for my nausea. And so that's how mainstream I actually was. But I really, I really connected with the whole thought of just a better way to enter the world. And, I was, so looking back, my coming to the decision to have a home birth came from really a true desire to find a better way. It was nothing planned, nothing. I can't even tell you if a seed was planted until I was expecting and realized that the system that I was in felt so impersonal. Grief of my mom's passing made me more fragile and more vulnerable and more sensitive and in greater need. Oh, and then not having a community, right? Being new to New York City, it made me need nurturing, need tenderness. I was so lost and fragile at the time that, and experiencing something for the first time that was so beyond me that it made me look at alternatives and then ultimately choose to have a home birth.
I actually was a little bit like you, to be honest. I was actually told before we got pregnant with Gavin that I wouldn't have any children. I had a bunch of medical problems and a bunch of stuff in there. So it was a big surprise. And when you're told by medical that you'll never have a child, and then suddenly you have this miracle child, you kind of start to doubt the medical side of things. Obviously they were incorrect because we did nothing and here's this baby. And so I did the normal stuff. You look up a doctor, and you live in a city, you have a ton of doctors. If you look up OB, there's just a list, and then you're do I want a guy? Do I want a girl? Do I want, who do you want? How do you pick a doctor when there's so many? And so I was really overwhelmed, and I went to my friends about it and said, who's your doctor? Well, some of the doctors that I called, they were booked. They didn't have any room around when I was due. And so I was okay, well, one of them, there's a branch of doctors that's kind of all over my valley. And so I called the one because a couple of my friends had a different doctor in this system of doctors. And there was one that was kind of closer to my house. And I called the office and they said, well, which doctor do you want? I was like, I don't know, but I'll take a lady doctor. Like that kind of narrows it down like a little bit, like not really, but it, if you just kind of throw out something, they said, okay, we have one for you, whatever. And so when I went to meet her, she was extremely rude to me. Like this is my first time. I'm excited, especially I'm excited because this is a miracle. This is a magical time. And first time mom is like a whole nother experience. And when I went in, she didn't want to meet, he was my boyfriend at the time, husband now. She didn't want to meet him. She didn't even want to go get him from the waiting room. She didn't, I didn't actually meet her in the room where you get examined. I met her in her office. She sat behind a desk and didn't even stand up to like greet me. It was like she was busy doing paperwork and okay, you're a first time mom. Okay, this looks like this is probably your due date. You're doing blood work, whatever. See you when you come back. Here's a stack of prescriptions. And at the time I was thinking like, oh, I don't need all this medicine. I'm healthy and I'm fine and I'm good. And she still was kind of like, no, here's medicine. But I was like, no, I think I'm good. Like she didn't examine me. She didn't know me, so I thought that was a little bit too much, but she still kept saying, here's prescription. And I was like, no, I'm good. But when I left, the way that she had treated me and the way she had talked to me, I felt like I was a number in the system that you just like come in, come out, come in, come out. And that I was so little to her, even as a first-time mom, that she didn't even want to stand up and shake my hand. Like, I felt like it was, to me, it's this huge, big deal to my life. And to her, it was like, it wasn't a big deal. So when we left there, I remember crying in the car and I was just like, I'm never going back there. She's so mean. And, and here's my boyfriend who never even got to meet her. So he doesn't even know. And I'm telling him whatever. And he's like, we're going to call the office and complain, because he's like, this shouldn't have happened to you. Maybe we can get a different doctor, that kind of thing. And we called them. And then it was like, they almost didn't act surprised about it, which was a little scary at the time. And then we were trying to switch, and they went to have somebody else, some head person was supposed to call us, and they never called us back. And so I was like, okay, now we have to start again, looking at a list of doctors. And where do we go? Who do we pick? Are we going to end up doing this again? Is this going to be another thing that's going to happen? And I'm just going to end up going from doctor office to doctor, and I'm just going to be getting bigger and bigger and farther along. And, I had a couple of friends that were in the community, and they were like, come meet my midwife kind of thing. And so that's how it ended up happening. I had no plans. I knew they had home births, like, that kind of thing. It was just not on my radar at all. And I was like, at this point I'll meet anyone because maybe I'm doing something wrong. Like, and then, you don't know. So I went and met the midwife and got a lot of information from a lot of home birth mothers, like not so much the midwife themselves, but the community is very like, come join the sisterhood and we love you. And we, you know what I mean? Like open arms, we're here for you. And especially when I had an OB, it didn't work out. It went really bad. So then I was just like easy. I was such an easy target for them to be like, look, that's what all doctors do. That's just how they are. They want to make money off from us. They want to push medicine on us. You can't have a natural birth in the hospital. So it was super easy for me to like, just believe it and just fall right into it. So I was like, this must be where I'm supposed to be. Like, I really thought like, I guess I'm supposed to be here because I don't need pain management. I don't need all this stuff. Like, I want to be more natural. So I thought that's what it was. I didn't go with that midwife, but I did end up like looking into midwives and stuff like after that. And at the time, this was over 8 years ago, there wasn't what there is now on social media with like these influencers and all these pre-birthers and all this stuff. There wasn't like that. So if you looked up home birth, you only seen videos and pictures from normally like a photographer or something was like, look at this beautiful water birth. That's exactly what you've seen. So I had this image of like, I want a water birth. Like, I really want to have a water birth. And my mom is old country, like, she's immigrated and all stuff. So she's like, that's kind of like a thing for other cultures and stuff, because they don't, like, now looking at it, they don't have pain relief, they don't have medicine. So of course they're trying to do other things to like deal with pain during labor. But at the time I didn't think anything of it, because my mom was like, yeah, you want a water birth, that's like super normal, natural, like it's the way to go. We've been doing it forever, all those lines. So it was just really easy for me to fall into it and not get enough information either, because of how, when you look into it, you're only going to see kind of like with these, like the natural birthers are showing you, what the midwives are advertising. Because if you look up on a midwife thing, they're going to show you like names of babies and dates and all these amazing stories. And maybe they have like pictures all over the place. You're not seeing anything else. Like that's all you see. There's like, so there's your information that you're going to get. And everybody says, do your research. Like later on, they tell you, do your research, and you think you're doing your research too, because I really thought like I was interneting it up, like looking things up and stuff, because I had to look up midwives too. And there's a pretty decent long list of midwives in my area too. And I had to decide, how do you pick a midwife out of a sea of midwives? And so it was kind of the same thing of like, what do you do? Where do you go? And there wasn't enough information, but I ended up with my midwife because I thought she was a nurse midwife, and she referred to herself as a midwife, and how she's like, oh, I do all the testing and I do ultrasounds. I do all these other things that a lot of other more natural midwives don't do. So I'm kind of at this different level. So I was like, she's perfect. She's that perfect in between of what I want. I want medical care. I want to do all the testing. I want to make sure that both of us are good. I was like, she's like the perfect midwife. Like we were super like connected too. Like when you met with her, it was just like meeting with a really good friend, like, and that was the other thing, is it was just like, you instantly form a bond with your midwife when you meet them. So that's how I ended up with like in the community. And I think she was actually the last one on my list that if it hadn't worked out with her, I would have went back to looking at OBs. And like that is scary now when I look back at it. But she was my last one, because I had seen some of them. They were too woo. I didn't know the term woo at the time, but they were too like literally putting the ear horn thing on the belly. I was like, no, I don't want to do any of that, because I didn't know that free birth was a thing, but I didn't want to be like that, where I'm basically birthing at home with nobody paying attention to anything. I didn't want to do that. So I had enough thought for some reason to stay away from that. And there's a lot of midwives that are like that don't do anything. So she was my last one on the list. And here she turned out to be the one that was like, look, I have a medical bed and all this stuff. Like she really looked the part of like a nurse midwife. So she was super believable for me to, pick her. And that's how I ended up into the community even longer, I think, because I don't think I would have stuck around in the community very much either, to be honest.
I think I have talked a little bit about this before, but for me, the whole concept of natural birth was kind of just always a given. And as I grew up, I started hearing stories as like my cousins who were older than me had babies, and friends that were a little bit older, and then my peers. And I started hearing more and more stories. When I got pregnant with my daughter, I was like, I want to have a baby. I want it to be natural, but I know so many people who've had really bad situations in hospitals, and they're basically forced into inductions and forced into C-sections and forced into all these things. And that might be the right choice for them, but that's not the right choice for me. And I know that I'm strong enough, and I know that I can do this. And I just had this really big mentality where it was just so mind over matter. And I do think there are some aspects of childbirth that are mind over matter. It's the same thing as if you're running a marathon. Sometimes you want to quit on yourself, but you do have it in you to continue. So power through, but you can't power through like a pelvis that's too small. Like there's no mentality that can get you through that. So I went against my own wishes when my daughter was born, and I went with traditional OBGYN, planned to have my baby at a hospital, planned to just try to have that all natural birth in a hospital. And then I had your typical like cascade of interventions birth, which hindsight is 2020. I now know that the reason for some of the outcomes are because I was post dates, are because I denied induction at 39 weeks. There were a lot of things, and looking back, I also know the hospital was fighting for me to have a vaginal birth because I could have walked through the door with the things that were going on, meconium, waters ruptured without being in active labor. All of those things are cause for an immediate C-section. And they're like, we want you to try. We want to support you through trying, but it's got to be on these terms. So I was so upset about the way my daughter was born because it did wind up in a C-section, and it was all the things. And I know that's why my midwives like loved me when I first became their patient, because they were like, when she has her birth, she's going to be that victory story that we get to tell on social media about the mother who overcame the terrible things the hospital did to her when she had a C-section. So I had my daughter. I kind of began to be angry about the details of it as time went on. Obviously, my midwife opened, I've said this a couple times, she opened right at the right time, because she opened right around the time my daughter was born. And that's how I found myself with her. I had already found the natural community. I had already found the home birth community. And that's the community that I wanted to be with my first one. But she came into town and she was so vocal and so loud. And I got pregnant with my son John. And my boyfriend had never really experienced anything with children. He had one friend who had kids. He didn't really know much about birth to know why we should be in a hospital. So when I got pregnant with our son and I was like, I want to deliver at this place, it's out of the hospital, but it's midwife. He was all for it because he was like, yeah, like you're a woman. Like that's what your body's built for, right? And we go through my whole pregnancy and they're kind of the same as yours, where they're like, we're doing the testing, we're doing this, we're doing that, but they're not really doing the appropriate amount of testing, and they're not really doing the right tests. They have protocol for diagnosing gestational diabetes, but it wasn't good protocol. It misses it sometimes, all of that stuff. So I really thought I was in good hands, and I thought they were taking care of me. Being in New York, I had nothing but CNs and CNMs. So 2 of them were nurses. One of them had a master's degree in public health with a focus on women's studies. I was like, you can't really be, if you're going to be out of the hospital, this is the situation you want. And then I think we can all pretty much attest to the fact that they dropped me like a hot date when everything hit the fan, and all the fanfare and celebration that they had when I became their patient was more than eradicated as soon as what happened to me happened. So I joined because these were people who were like, we believe in you and we celebrate you and we want nothing but the best for you. And we are going to provide you with nothing but the best. You can trust us. We're your sisters. We're your friends. And then it honestly couldn't have been farther from the truth.